I want to welcome you to day 2 of the Depression on College Campuses Conference. Thank you for your perseverance to get here despite some challenging conditions, especially those of you who have traveled to Michigan. Please come back again. One quick housekeeping note, if you would remember to fill out evaluations after each session. There are evaluations in your packet, and there are also evaluations available in each individual session. Those are really important. We use those to plan for next year, so if you could be sure to fill those out, that would be great. My name is Mary Jo Dapry, and I am the Director of Health Promotion and Community Relations here at the University of Michigan. Yeah. And I am grateful. I am just grateful beyond belief for the opportunity to participate as a moderator for this student panel. You are about to meet 4 extraordinary students. 2 from Texas Tech, who traveled all the way from Lubbock, Texas, and 2 from the University of Michigan, all who participate in Collegiate Recovery programs. They will inspire you, and they will fill your heart with hope, which I think is a really great way to start the day. This is also an opportunity to highlight an important movement that is happening across the country. There have been some pioneering campuses that have been doing this work for decades, and because of a small network of dedicated but strategic practitioners, this movement is expanding. So we, all of us, really are here on the shoulders of pioneers who have led this work. In particular, Dr. Kitty Harris from Texas Tech, and we are also here, importantly, in the service to students who need all of us to think about how to move this work forward. For the researchers in the room, Dr. Harris and Dr. Alexandra Laudette are also leading research in this area. We have stacks of research on addiction and treatment, but what they are contributing is the study of recovery, the ingredients that are necessary to sustain a strong and healthy recovery while in college. As you are about to hear, there is rich wisdom in these students' stories, not only in their personal truths, but also in the shared themes about the pursuit and practice of new coping skills. So to give you a little lay of the land, each of them are going to give you a brief introduction about who they are, where they've been, and where they are now. And then we'll have some guided questions, and then we will open it up from questions from you. So there will be folks in the aisles with cards. If you'll write your question, we'll bring those up, and we will pose them to the panelists, okay? So without further ado, I'm going to let Rory kick off and give his introduction.
Thank you, Mary Jo. So my name is Rory Crook, and I grew up in South Lyon, Michigan, not too far from here. I started living in Ann Arbor probably about 12 years ago, and part of that's related to some things that I'll get into a little more in a couple of questions from now, but a lot of it had to do with, I moved to Ann Arbor in part as a response to some addiction-related things with a local community treatment center called Dawn Farm. I've since moved into the area, and after about 9 years of living in that community or so, I eventually started attending at the Washtenaw, actually, then transferred here to the University of Michigan, where I did my undergraduate in the School of Kinesiology, thinking that I would do something with movement psi, medicine, track, pre-med. And then I traveled to India, not my first experience out of the country, but when I wound up in India, it was through a fellowship where I had some experience with kids in a school with polio issues, and it just changed my entire mindset. Coming from the Dawn Farm related scene, service work was a major staple of doing things there, and I'll get into some of that in a minute, but having this experience in India really just changed the way that I thought I was going to fit in this world, and so eventually I applied to the School of Public Health, where I'm a grad student there now. I'm going to graduate behavioral health education and health informatics concentration there. So, I thank you, Mary Jo, for asking me to do this. Before, not to get too much into collegiate recovery, but it's been a really I haven't been able to be that involved with it because I'm on the way out of, and it's a fairly new thing taking place here. But I do appreciate having the opportunity to be working with the people over at UHS doing this amazing work. And and I've met some of the ombudsmans, and I've met other assistant deans and people who are really advocating for this. Trying to get up, because we all know that perhaps that the culture here, around drinking, it can be hectic at times for students. So, so thank you everybody for coming.
Hi, y'all. I'm Abby. I'm from Texas Tech University. So I'm going to tell you a little bit in depth of what my life used to be like and compared to how it is now. I got sober and clean in Houston, Texas. I grew up in a really loving family. I have 2 loving parents and an older sister, and a little bit like my life in the beginning was I always felt a little bit different than my peers, and I always felt like there was something separating me from their companionship. And so about age 10 for me, my sister was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and my house got a little bit hectic. And for me, my way of dealing with that was, this was exactly what separated me from my peers. This is what's different from me. My family dynamic is a little bit separate than everybody else's, and I spent a lot of this 10-year-old year trying to fix my family and try to make it normal and what appeared to be normal to me. And after a little while, I discovered I couldn't do that, and I started acting out in an eating disorder because it was a way I could control what was going on. I could control what I was putting into my body and taking out, and it was a way of me just compromising to try to deal with the pain that I was suffering externally rather than internally. Shortly after, I ended up getting hospitalized and introduced to alcohol for the first time, and was on a quick downhill battle, and ended up having my 15th birthday in a treatment center for adolescents in Houston, Texas. And along with the treatment center in Texas, they have a huge pull for young people in recovery in Houston, and I was really fortunate. They have these systems called APGs, which is an alternative peer group, and I got sober through those, and they were an outpatient as well for 18 months. They basically provide you a network of young people in recovery to get clean and work a 12-step program and really embrace and heal and the beautiful thing called recovery. And I know for me, I got sober and I didn't know my favorite color. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know who I was, because my whole time during my using, I was an alcoholic, and that's what personality trait I took on, because that's all I knew, and that's all I enjoyed, and everything else was foreign to me. So I know from recovery, I discovered who I was as a female and who I was as a woman, and I learned how to grow together with a higher power and blossom in recovery. I actually got sober, and I went to a sober high school they have in Houston, which are incredible. They just put you around a huge group of, people in recovery, and you learn how to stay sober as a young person in recovery. A lot of my peers had graduated and gone to Texas Tech and joined the Center for Addiction and Recovery, and they loved it, so I followed their path, and it has been the beginning of my life in so many different ways. I'm a part of the center, and they have been just magnificent, and I'll get on to that a little bit later, just talking about how much it's benefited me through my college career. But things are looking up. I'm an energy commerce major at Texas Tech, and I'm about to start those classes in junior year, and I'll end up actually going to study abroad in Peru to do a service opportunity with the school, and I'm really excited. So this is just kind of the beginning of a lot of my life. Thank y'all.
Thanks, Abby and Rory. My name's Austin, and I'm from Texas Tech as well. So I'm grateful to be here. I'm going to tell you, similar to these guys, just kind of what happened, what it was like, and what it's like now. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama originally. I grew up there, and I went to the University of Alabama. Around those years, I started getting into a little bit of legal trouble, and I started drinking fairly heavily. About that time, I learned that I may have a problem with alcohol, but definitely not with drugs. And so I decided to quit drinking as much and take a dive into the drug world. And what I realized, and I realized this later, was that I had a problem with both, and that it was this problem called alcoholism, drug addiction. And so I went to treatment, and then I went to treatment again. And the second time around, I decided to change my people, places, and things, which is a term we use. I needed a support group. I needed sober living, extended treatment. And so that's what I did. I moved up to Minnesota, and I lived in a sober living environment for about a year, not quite a year. While I was up there, I learned about what's called we call it a CRC, Collegiate Recovery Community, and here it's the Collegiate Recovery Program. And so I was interested in getting back into school, but I didn't know how to do that. And so I decided to apply to this, what we call the Center for the Study of Addiction and Recovery at Texas Tech University. There was some requirements there, a year of sobriety and this and that. And, I was essentially a college dropout, and I didn't feel like there was any way for me to get back into higher education. I applied and I got accepted, and within a few weeks I moved to Lubbock, Texas, and started at Texas Tech. I'm majoring in communication studies, public affairs is my concentration, and so I sit here today in front of you with the pain and the sorrow and the regret almost of addiction, and being able to come out of that and recover from such a hopeless state of mind and body, and to kind of get back on the path that, well, I know the path that my parents wanted me to be on, the path that I thought I wanted to be on before I was knocked off the course. And so it's a cool deal, and I'm excited to tell you guys about it, and excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Austin. Hello? Okay. I'm Katherine. I'm a student here at University of Michigan. I'm from Michigan originally. I was born here. I was born just right over there at the hospital. But I grew up in a town near here for the first 12 years of my life. And, I also came from, like, a great, loving family. In the first few years of my life, there was, my father passed away. So that was sort of a tragic thing that I think affected us all. But I have a really supportive, amazing family, so that really helped. And then my mom eventually got remarried, and we moved to Montreal when I was 12. And I completed high school there, where you graduate in 11th grade. And then I moved to New York for 12th grade, senior year of high school. So I actually graduated from high school twice. I have 2 high school diplomas. I'd say I can't really remember a time. Like, I feel like kind of my whole life I was sort of living this double life. One where I was sort of doing really well in school, and another where I was just kind of like really struggling. I definitely had a huge struggle and a huge battle with depression and anxiety, which really it probably started to get pretty bad around the time I was like 13 or 14, and got like increasingly worse during high school, and I really struggled with it. And I started drinking when I was 12, and I loved it. It was just like right away something that I loved. It was like an escape. It was something that was fun. It was something that felt good. And, my whole life, even before I started drinking, I loved anything that would kind of like alter my mood, whether it was like being the center of attention or, anything really. So, that just progressed throughout the years. And like I said, there was sort of this double life sort of thing where I was really able to like keep it together in school. But like at the same time, my drinking, like on the weekends and whatever, I was always binge drinking, and it got increasingly worse. And I also started doing harder and harder drugs, which kind of followed me throughout once I got older, I started doing harder drugs probably when I was like 17. And was pretty well into that for a few years there. And then when we moved to New York, I kind of like took a break from the harder drugs because I was in a suburb and I didn't really know how to find them. And so my drinking and marijuana use was consistently pretty bad. And then I came to college here. And it was easy for me again, like I had freedom, and it was easy again for me to find, harder drugs. And just the drinking and the drug use sort of took off, and, I lasted about a semester and a half before my parents kind of pulled me out. And I was like headed on my way out anyways, probably academically. So I got, after a series of consequences, just with my parents, health consequences, and legally a little bit. My parents had me go to an outpatient treatment center, and I had no intention at all on getting sober. I thought that I was just kind of normal. Maybe I partied a bit more than other people, but I thought that was okay, and I was always kind of able to justify it by the fact that everything looked okay on the outside. And I don't know, I guess while I was there, I just eventually, just like the group setting, and something just sort of spoke to me. And it's really sort of like a miraculous sort of thing. Like I never imagined ever being sober. And somehow over time, it took a little while. There was a while there while I was an outpatient where I was like not sober and lying about it. And then I had about 2 weeks sober, and I came back to school. Came back here, and I was 19 years old, and I was like really kind of lost and had no idea what to do. I didn't know where I should live. I was supposed to be living in my sorority, but I really drank a lot with all my friends there. And that's when I met Mary Jo. We didn't really know who to talk to, and she was I don't remember what you were, in charge of that sort of stuff. But there was no resources for people in recovery here on campus, and I was kind of like blown away by that. There was no sort of community, no way for me to really connect with other people at U of M, and that around that time, that's sort of when things all sort of started to come together. And I'm a major in psychology. I'm a senior here, so about to graduate.
Thanks, you guys. All right. Okay, so the first question for the panelists is, what has been the most helpful to you during your college experience? And that doesn't necessarily have to be affiliated with the Collegiate Recovery Program. I think there's wisdom around how we can be helpful in lots of different areas. So what has been the most helpful for you?
Thank you. So I didn't, full disclosure, I didn't really talk about my addiction or anything like that initially, and not like I'm afraid to talk about that at all. But many years ago I was a heroin addict and, a blackout drinker, and I used everything. Part of that with, I was thinking, sitting here, this is a depression conference, and yesterday Dr. Vereen was talking about, the gender differences, between men and women or boys and girls, and he's saying like men, need this to fix or take action or do something, like to help fix. And perhaps there was depression going on there. I used to use drugs a lot to sort those differences out in me, And fast forward now, I've been sober 10 years now, so I've tried to put that into perspective from my experience here before I go forward to answer this question. So what has been most helpful? Obviously not drinking and drugging, and outside of this community, is an amazing recovery community. It's a 12 steps based recovery community. And part of that's related to, some of the great treatment facilities, and they're just pioneers out there doing these, this work outside of the campus. I'm sure some of it happens in conjunction with what takes place at the university here, but, having advocates like Mary Jo who saw that there was a need for this, these sorts of activities here because people were coming to UHS, or there was like Kitty, or Alexandra Laudette, who were like, we need to do research on this so we can apply for grants and get funding and like really understand this because, and I've talked with other public health professors before about the stigma related to the, getting sober, that whether it's uncool or it's like a bunch of, if you think about 12-step meetings, a lot of the time people talk about them being like old men sitting around smoking cigarettes complaining about the sad state of the nation, and that's not what it's about anymore. It might have been like that, back in the 30s, but that's, some time ago. So outside AA community or 12-step community is pretty important. Obviously not drinking and drugging, having the advocates. And I think for me, it's been about being able to connect with people, as a grad student, especially now, like I can talk to my professors and they get it, like there's some of them, it's different in that I could never connect with students in undergrad. I think I was like 25 when I went through undergrad here because I had been through a bunch of, other sort of things beyond my control, due to my addiction. So that was really tough, like adjusting to that. But in grad school, I've had a remarkably, different sort of experience, and part of that is related to the advocates who happen to be professors and who happen to be directors of programs like Mary Jo. So that's, go ahead. Thanks.
All right. What I have to say is, kind of referring back to my story, my whole entire life I had pretty much felt alone. So when I walked into the rooms of recovery, it was the first time I felt like I belonged somewhere and I fit in and I had people around me to support me. And I think for me throughout my college career, the Center for Addiction and Recovery has been the most positive experience at Texas Tech University. For the center, we actually have a building on campus that's dedicated just to us. We actually can go in and everybody that works there is part of the center, and we have our own basement area where we have pool tables, study hall area, and it's incredible. And I know for me, it's one of those things where when I walk into the center, I feel like I have a place to be. I feel like I fit in. I feel like I have a group of friends around me, and the closest friends I have are in recovery today, and those friends in recovery are in the center, which has been extremely, extremely important. And it's one thing to feel like you're not alone in this world, and that has meant the most to me. I have a hobby, and I actually rock climb, and one of the counselors, I guess you could say, at the center came and had a competition and watched me climb for 2 hours. And that's the kind of love and support that the center provides. We provide you somewhere to go and talk out whatever you need to, whatever you're struggling with, ask for help. And they're always there to help you and to support you. They're not there to judge or tell you what to do. They just tell you, I'm here to listen, and you do what you need to do. And what 12-step recovery is, they just motivate it and encourage you to heal rather than run away or so on and so forth. But I think that's it.
Well, this is a great question, and for me, I can kind of look at it. I had 2 college experiences, essentially. I had one at Alabama, and now I have one at Texas Tech. And what's interesting is that the experience at Texas Tech now, one of the greatest things is the fellowship. It's the students around me that are striving for higher education and, working hard to get A's. But it's that fellowship, it's that brotherhood, so to speak. And I had that at Alabama. I was in a fraternity. I lived in the fraternity house. But it didn't feel the same. And I wasn't going to class. I wasn't trying to do well. And so the most helpful, the question asks me what has been most helpful in my college experience. And it's that fellowship. It's that sense of support. And also, we have to look at the fact that I was a college dropout. I had absolutely hit rock bottom, dropped out of school. I had already started paying back my loans. I wasn't going back to school. There was no hope. And what happened with this program is it put me back in school. It allowed me to come back and give it another shot, I've had a couple of second chances, and this is one of them. This is a second chance for school. So the most helpful is that. I mean, I was accepted back into a 4-year university and told to go do my best. You know, that doesn't happen every day. And so not only am I now back in school, I'm a senior and I'll graduate in December, but I've got a group of people around me and we all try to get 4.0s. I mean, I'm sitting here with like a 3.8. And that is just not, that's not who I was my first college experience. I took pride in not going to class, and I took pride in being at the bar. And now I'm taking pride in all these other things that are healthy, and that there's some longevity there. So I was granted back into school. I mean, I was given a second chance, and I'm taking that gratefully. And so that's been the most helpful, is allowing me to enroll again and to be accepted back. So thank you.
I think it's really interesting listening to them talk, Austin and Abby, because we haven't had this community around us very long. Really, it's just started to take off. I mean, last year a bit, but really even more so this year. And so when I think about what was important for me and helpful to me during college, it was really like I almost feel like it's just these really lucky circumstances where certain people were put into my life. I've had like certain people along the way who have really just been able to understand my struggle and help encourage me to, go through it and do well in school, but also take care of myself. So, one of those people was definitely being introduced to Mary Jo, and she was able to connect me with, another woman on this campus who was in recovery and looking to start a community here. And that's when we started a student group called Students for Recovery, because we didn't yet have the actual Collegiate Recovery Center. And, and that was the start of something. At first, there was probably about 2 or 3 of us in recovery, and there was just a bunch of people from the school social work who were like, okay, we'll join the group and help you out and support you. And that was something interesting. And it's really been this really cool, beautiful experience to watch that grow and to actually, we had this vision and this dream that maybe someday U of M could have something like Texas Tech. And now that's starting, and that's so awesome. And to see there's all these now there's probably about 20 people in the program, which is a lot from where we were, and a lot of them are new, and some of them have gotten sober within this program, and it's just the coolest thing to watch. And it makes me so happy to be a part of it. Because, when I got sober, I didn't have that. And so luckily there's a really strong, a really big 12-step community here with a lot of young people, and that was very helpful. That's where I kind of found my community that they were talking about. However, not everyone there is in school, not everyone there is striving for the same things. So it is really helpful to be around people who have also similar goals as you. Someone else who was really helpful was actually my academic advisor, which was also sort of just I'm just lucky to have met the right person who kind of understood what was important to me, is having an authentic experience where I'm taking care of myself, because that's how I'm going to do well in school, and that's how I'm really going to persevere in life. And after about I guess I had almost 1.5 years sober, almost 2 years sober. I was really kind of juggling all this school stuff, and it was with his support where he was like, I think you should take some time off school, which is something I never really thought about in such a competitive, let's graduate, let's do really well environment. And that sort of person, that sort of thinking helped me so much. And I did. I took a year off school, and that was really helpful for me. That really helped me like grow and think about why I wanted to be here and what I could do when I came back. So really, it's just been people I've been lucky to meet along the way. And now it's so great that this center is here, because when people come in, that's already built in for them. And even people like me or Rory can tell them how we did it and be supportive of them. And that's really amazing and almost shocking that I'm helping somebody, when I never even thought I would be sober ever, so.
So who would ever like to take this one first, just jump in. But the next question is, what has been the biggest challenge to you during your college experience?
First. So, wow, yeah, there's a lot of things that I guess where to start. And I had mentioned in my response to the last question about, it was difficult to connect with students here at the age of 25, 26, in undergrad, right? So they're 18, 21-year-old students, and they're just coming here. The idea for them to be social is to, in a lot of circumstances, get fake IDs and go to bars or go to frat houses and party, and I could not connect to any of that. I just couldn't. Part of me being the sober person, trying to do, navigate the whole environment here and connect to people. That thankfully, like I had mentioned about public health professors, I did have a good academic advisor, Julie Simon, at the School of Kinesiology, who knew this about me when I came from Washtenaw Community College. And, she never made me meet or anything. I think there was, part of me, I had mentioned I went through Dawn Farm. That's how I got established in this community out here. But I happened to take a working position with them, where I would work with, their residents coming out of their transitional housing as part-time work for while I'm, going to school here. And, that really helped a lot with me sort of getting grounded, staying grounded in the community outside of U of M, because as I had said, I could not connect to the students. But I did find, thanks again to advocates and, in my own faculty advisor at the School of Kines, that I could connect to professors and programs, international programs, centers, things on North Campus that I had no business being a part of. I didn't have the sort of the depth of education, and I was a high school dropout, and so that was really difficult getting traction with that, because I didn't have sort of the social norms aspect of what do you do when you're you need to learn how to study for Orgo, you need to learn how to study for, physics or whatever, all those, the things that we do here. And this whole student groups, there were some other challenges now that I'm in grad school, is that, I'm with people who are my age, right? I'll be 32 soon, and it doesn't feel as different as it did before. And but still, at the same time, I get a lot of emails about bar crawls and happy hours. And like I had mentioned, I haven't drank in over 10 years, but it's it's not like it's something that goes away. Thankfully, I've just learned to take that and turn it into something else. And mostly, it's just the strength of the community. Here, working with CRP people, which I've been I've been working with people like Mary Jo and Matt, and so one thing that was great about my faculty advisor, Julie Simon, is there was a time came when it was time to graduate, and there was the opportunity to be in the daily paper, and this is how I got in touch with Mary Jo, is that I told my story in the Michigan Daily as I was transitioning into grad school, and I had been to another thing is that I had been through prison for a couple of years, prior to all this university stuff. And and so I had to, it was always full disclosure with the university, because they were like, oh, let's hope like this person's not like a liability, right? So I got an opportunity to tell that story to the Michigan Daily, and that's how I got on Mary Jo's radar, and all the wonderful people at HBCR who are sitting in the front row. You should get to know them also later. But so, I think that's enough. Thank you.
All right, well, I'd have to say the thing that I struggled with the most whenever I came to school, there's a few things. I didn't get accepted into Texas Tech University. Along with the sober high school, we'll just say they don't really value education that much at sober high schools. They really just want you to get clean and, get you good to go for school, and they worry about education when you get to college. And so for me, I didn't do very well in my SATs, and I was so worried. I knew I could do well in school. I just knew I hadn't gotten the chance to. I messed up a little bit in high school and didn't really get to, focus my energy on education. It was on other things. And for me, the center offers a scholarship, and financially, I'm paying for my own school, and they offer me a scholarship, and so I was capable of getting into the school. How Texas Tech works is if you get a scholarship over a certain amount, you basically, the whole application process gets, hurried along, and you get into the school. And for me, it was like that was the opportunity to go to school and, learn for the first time. And I was really, really nervous when I came to school, because I had about an 8th grade math education. And for me, it was trying to balance what was going on in my life between recovery, friends, school, and work as well. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was real worried, because I'm extremely competitive in everything that I do today. And one of those things, like Austin was saying, all the center students, for the most part, they strive to get a 4.0. And I can tell you that I didn't go to school, and the center, we have an advisor that's only for us, and he is absolutely incredible. He puts us in classes that he knows we're capable of handling, and he also puts us in classes with other center students. The center, we have about 90 students in our Collegiate Recovery program, and so basically every single class I go to, I have about 4 or 5 friends in. And 4 or 5 people normally in the center, maybe 10 plus, have already taken the class before me. And for me, that was the biggest thing, because I learned how to reach out and ask for help, and ask my peers if we could get together and study. And along with managing schoolwork and whatnot, I maintain a 3.8 GPA today, and that's absolutely ridiculous compared to where I was before I came here. Also, another thing with balancing that, I also have to work. Just to maintain my way through school, and, working through the whole entire balancing process. It's juggling for a long time. My freshman year was a big just juggle of finding out how many hours were too much for work and how many school hours were too much, and, how to go about handling that. And the center was really just supportive of me and figuring out what I could do. They also got me the job that I have today. So, really, I would say the hardest thing was finding just balance and, learning what I could handle and what I couldn't. And that's all.
I have to agree with Abby as far as balance goes. The hardest thing for me has been to stay grounded. I've needed all along to stay grounded. One of the kind of the themes with the Center for the Study of Addiction and Recovery is to flourish. We want our students to flourish. And so I really jumped on that train. I was going to flourish. And so there's been a few times when I'm like, I'm flourishing out of college. I need to get out of here. I need to go. I just bought a suit. Like, I got to go. And so people have had to slow me down. You still don't have that degree yet, Austin. What are you doing? And I forget that. So the biggest challenge for me in college is to stay in college. I'm so grateful for the experience, but I feel like I'm ready to go. And it's crazy, because people tell me you're going to wish you were back in college when you're out of it. And everyone in this room may agree with that. And I can understand where you're coming from, but I want to be in that seat, sometimes. I want to be doing the research. So that's another thing that the center has helped me with is slow down, slow down. Let's focus one class at a time type thing, one semester at a time. The advisor that Abby was referring to, there was kind of a mix-up, and he told me that I was supposed to graduate this summer. And boy, was I excited. I started, looking at law schools, and I started looking at internships, and I got, I was going to be the president next year type thing. And what I realized is, and what my academic advisor had to sit down and tell me is, it's not possible for you to graduate this soon. You've been here for a year. And now I did have some transfer credits, so it made a little more sense in my head, but so I went from thinking about graduating in a year, this was last summer, to I've got maybe a year and a half, closer to 2 years. And that helped me. I just had to let go, and I just had to focus on what's right in front of me. And the students around me surely do assist me in that. But I'm going to graduate, and I'm going to sit here in front of all of you and tell you that. I've got about 6 months left, closer to a year, and yeah, thank you. And so staying grounded, easy answer.
I think for me, oh boy, there's a lot of challenges. And I think that maybe my experience was a little different than the rest of theirs because I was getting, I had 2 weeks sober when I came back to school. So really just was really going through this recovery process while trying to maintain an academic career. And that is really hard. When getting sober, it's it's almost like being it's almost like you're a baby. I was just learning how to do so many things for the first time. Even just I remember I remember when I first got sober, I was convinced that I'd never be able to sleep again because I hadn't gone to sleep without drinking or at least smoking some weed in years. And I remember when the idea came through my head that everybody else in the world goes to sleep, so it must be possible. And I was like, wow. But it's really just crazy things like that. And just functioning, and you're going through so much emotionally. There's just so much growth to be done. I didn't know, I was not used to living a life without the crutch of drugs and alcohol, and those were certainly a crutch for me while I was doing my schoolwork too. There's definitely some things I used to help me do that. So there was all sorts of stuff, and that was really difficult. I was kind of in over my head, and there wasn't really anybody who kind of understood that. It's kind of hard to say, to a teacher, I'm sorry, this paper is late. I was freaking out for a few hours last night because I wanted to get high. But actually there was a few times when I did have to say that to my teachers, and they responded wonderfully, and that was also a really lucky thing too. So, in trying to figure out, how much school can I take? How much do I need to focus on myself? But at that point you couldn't tell me, Katherine, you shouldn't be in school. You should be working on yourself right now, because I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to be, I didn't know really what it meant to be in recovery. And I was struggling trying to find that out, and I was struggling trying to find a community that would help me figure out how to manage that. So, yeah, that was very challenging for me.
So, and some of you have touched on this just a little bit, but in keeping with the conference theme, if you could articulate the new coping strategies you've had to learn and practice to maintain a strong, healthy recovery? What are those skills you've had to either learn for the first time or relearn as part of recovery?
That's the last question, right? So, boy, oh boy. Well, so we're going off of some of those challenges that I talked about, having to deal, I recognize people in this audience from the School of Public Health, some people, I talked about those whole emails about bar calls and things. None of that bothers me, anymore. And never really did when I was here. The sort of sense of feeling like I was being included, but the part of me that was like, oh, you don't drink. Like, how included can you really be in that? That doesn't bother me. Nor, at times I've been grateful to be able to go to professors' houses and disclose this information, like, hey, I don't drink, and then just be receptive, like, oh, you don't drink, okay. And then I didn't have to go into long sort of explanation of why I don't drink wine, or I know nothing about it. I really appreciate it, because at time in my head, I'll be like, man, what if he asked me to drink, like, will I be able to do research with him if I say no, or something, crazy will come up in my head like that. Because it's so prevalent here, So, and there were some other things regarding coping strategies, and they're related to the challenges too. I've been able to travel through the university on 3 different occasions, and I've never really been able to tell people, hey, I have a drinking problem and a drugging problem, and if I'm going to go to India or I'm going to go to China, can you help me connect in some way, right, to a community there where, I don't have to worry about, in India not so much, but China definitely, there's just different social norms, like whether you're supposed to drink with people, it's a celebration and all these things, and Americans actually have a reputation around the world for being hearty drinkers. And so, to go somewhere, at least that's been my experience, but to go somewhere and to say, no, I don't drink, it's a really uncommon, people just don't understand it, and not just on one occasion say no, but on over 3 months say no, right? And how to prepare for things like that. And part of those coping strategies I've learned, I had mentioned I worked through Dawn Farm, and it really helps me stay grounded. I've been able to work with that entire community outside of the university, and be visible for other people who are getting sober, who are sort of on the path to come to this university, whether they're coming from Washtenaw, they're coming from Eastern, or they're coming from Texas or anywhere else in the U.S., that somebody could be here to receive them. But so at the same time, going in these other places, I've learned that these communities exist everywhere, and that I've gone to meetings in Shanghai, and I've gone to meetings in Beijing and Hong Kong, and there was a gentleman who was from this community who graduated undergrad from here, he happened to be in India at the same time I was, so I visited him down, and we had both been sober around the same time together, and just that's how I've dealt with that. I find those people who we have this common bond, and wherever they're at, it's just thankfully with the advent of the internet, I can go on and I can find them, even in Asia, or in other developing countries. So I think that's the best for me.
All right. Well, I just have to say, the biggest coping skill that I've learned is, I'll go a little bit back. I used to basically deal with all my problems, all of my emotions externally, rather than internally. I would drink so I wouldn't feel things because I didn't like emotions. Those were weird. And then, I would just do all these different things to change the way that I felt because I didn't like the way that I felt. And I think through recovery and a 12-step process, and a little bit about 12-step, if you're not familiar with the whole process, it kind of just is a healing process in itself. It teaches you how to address the feelings that you're feeling, and basically gives you a whole entire systematic way of, processing what's going on inside of your head and in your heart. And I know for me, part of being in recovery and coping was, addressing the problem, what was going on, addressing that I was capable of healing and being okay. Just because I was sad doesn't mean I was going to be sad forever. I learned how to value emotions today. You know, when I'm sad, I'm not always just so like set on being, you know, depressed forever. It's one of those things that it'll pass and I'll get that feeling of happiness again, but I have to know these other feelings before I can get to that one. So I think that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned in recovery, and it was just learning how to heal and how to, you know, take life as it comes at you. And, you know, he related a little bit on is being able to talk to people about what was going on was the biggest thing, because before I felt so alone and I dealt with things alone. And how I dealt with things alone was drinking and, you know, using other addictive behaviors. And when I got in recovery, it's one of those things where you talk, you just keep talking, and you just let everyone hear what's going on with you, and, you know, they help you through it. And it's a lot better to have two heads than one and talk about having like 20 people talk to you about what's going on, and, you know, you get through it, and it takes a lot of the power out of everything if you talk about it. And I think that was the biggest thing for me, was opening up and, you know, being genuine and being honest with what was going on, rather than putting on a show, playing the double life, and, you know, being able to live genuinely as a human being and, you know, have human feelings and emotions. Thanks.
Something that I've learned with coping is kind of what she touched on at the end of that is that I'm human. So I'm going to have these emotions, good and bad. I'm going to feel, you know, happy, and I'm going to feel sad. And so what recovery has showed me regarding coping with life is that, you know, keep moving forward. It's going to be okay. Talk to people. Some spiritual life is definitely included in my coping. And when I say spiritual life, I mean I try to be mindful of who I am and of my intentions, of what, you know, if a problem has just happened, what just happened, to stop and think about it. Some tools that I learned very early on is something very, very simple. HALT, H-A-L-T, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. You know, if I'm feeling terrible about a situation, am I any of those things? Because if I am, I need to slow down, and I need to think of another perspective, look at it in a different way. And that helps me most of all. And that's what, you know, in a 12-step program, we have what's called, you know, sponsors. It's similar to like a mentor. It's somebody that's, you know, my sponsor has been there and done that type of thing. You know, he's got what I want, and he's got a lot of experience. So if I'm having a problem, picking up the phone and calling him and asking him, you know, what's going on with this? I tell him what's going on. Generally, he will have a different perspective than I do in the moment, especially if I'm hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Sometimes he'll tell me to hang up and go take a nap, you know. When's the last time you ate, Austin? Come on, man. So that's been very, very important, because when I was using and drinking, if I felt great, I would drink to feel better than great. And if I felt terrible, I would drink to feel better than terrible. So there was always this mask I was putting on. And I felt vulnerable when I first got into recovery. You're never gonna get to drink again, Austin. Enjoy life. What? I don't have any weapons for that. Yeah. I'm scared. There's fear here. What do I do? Well, this guy's got a year of sobriety. He's done it for 365 days. Ask him. You know, it's something as simple as that. And that's what I did. And that's what I continue to do today. And that helps me cope.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to what everybody has said. And so it's definitely, I've learned a lot of my coping strategies from being a part of a 12-step program. And so what that has meant for me has been definitely the community aspect. So not going through this alone. And whenever I'm struggling, being able to reach out and call people and and if anything, just talk to them about it. You know, and then something else, which I know that we were all talking last night, I know that has helped all of us a lot too, is once you get some experience and some time in sobriety, something that really helps, it's actually essential, is to help other people. Because I often get so in my own head and so worked up about things, or if I'm upset, if I'm helping somebody else, it's almost like this magical thing. Like, I kind of forget about myself. Everything isn't revolving around me anymore. You know, somebody with 30 days sober comes to me and says, I'm scared. I don't know how to do this. And I can say, man, like, I was too, and I'm okay now, you know, most of the time. And when I'm not, I reach out to other people and I tell them kind of how I did it. And that's kind of how I keep myself around and keep myself going. It's like essential to help other people. And, you know, something else that has been really helpful for me is dealing with, like I had said before, I really struggled with depression. And, you know, of course, that got a lot better once I got sober. When I was sort of introduced to like this more spiritual sort of life that they were talking about, I never sort of like suffered in the same way when I was in pain. Like I always had, I kind of realized that no matter what, like I'm going to be okay. And that was never something that I was able to like process before. It was always like everything kind of seemed like the end of the world, and I did not know how I was going to get out of it or get over it or get through it. And now I know that, you know, even if the worst possible thing happens, like I fail out of school or this happens or that happens, like I'm still going to be okay. And as long as I try to do the next right thing and try to keep my sobriety as my first priority, because that's the most important thing. Because once I'm drinking and using drugs, like who knows if I'm going to be okay. So something else that has been really helpful for me has been going to therapy. So it's been really important for me to address my other issues as well. I feel like a lot of people who are addicts and alcoholics have a lot of co-occurring issues. And 12 steps can help a lot with a lot of things, but it can only bring you so far. So it has been like essential for me to really work through with a therapist who I really could connect with some of the other things that are going on. And it's been really difficult work, but probably some like the most important stuff that I've done in my whole entire life. And so that has been like also really critical for me.
Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left, and I have a stack of questions, so I'm not sure we're going to get through all of them, so maybe what I'll do is I'll read one, and whoever would like to answer it a little bit, and the briefer we keep it, the more questions we can get through. All right? So, other than being sober, what other health changes support your recovery, such as diet changes, sleep, exercise?
I can actually touch on that one. Along getting with recovery, I had the eating disorder aspect to kind of go with at the same time, and a lot of that for me was finding what was comfortable with me diet-wise, which was 3 meals a day, you know, getting some sleep at night, because before recovery, I didn't sleep at night because I was grounded and I was young, so I would leave at night and then I'd go to school in the morning. So whenever I got in recovery, it was like finding a passion, and my passion became rock climbing, and you know, staying healthy with that. And it's really, really important for me to take care of my body, you know, physically in order for me to, you know, do really well, because it just helps relieve that stress and, you know, all that anxiety that I get. So for me, it was a lot of the going and working out and getting the blood flowing.
Next, did you want to do
Well, yeah, so I mean, obviously, exercise is so important, right? And I find I do that now. It seems to fit with my schedule. I just go to the CCRB, and I can just get a quick one in the evening. It really helps with de-stressing, because none of that has changed. You know, my response to things is I just don't drink or drug anymore to deal with those issues, you know? And then the other thing is that I think diet is so important, right? If, you know, what you put in your body is obviously, you know, important, but also the awareness of that, you know, I think it's just been really, you know, critical. And having that relationship with myself, you know, like in the past, I did not care about anything that I put in my body, you know, and drugs were definitely at the top of that list. But now, you know, having this relationship with myself where I think about those things, you know, to help, you know, as a coping mechanism.
Next question is, what, if anything, could someone have done to help you before you were fully dependent?
I can say that nothing anybody was going to be able to do was going to help me. And, I talked about, I went to prison. I mean, I'm not an advocate for the penal system by any means at all, but it worked for me. And, it really rang my bell, 2 years, and it was all around the state here, Jackson, Mound, all these different places that, I just didn't like. I had this idea about where I was going in my life, but when I looked at my trajectory, it was just like, I'm not going to get anywhere near that if I continue to do this. And I think that I had this epiphany. It happened actually before I went to prison, where I was the type of person who did not want to face the consequences, and be responsible for the decisions I was making. Granted, I was only 18, 19, and a day came when somebody in recovery or in this community said, hey, if you really, because I had run away previous to all this stuff to California when I was a kid and lived on the streets. And, I was sitting at this crossroad thinking the same thing again. I'm just going to leave town, and this time I'll stay sober. And I was like, I'll go to meetings when I get there. And the person said to me, you just can't run from these things anymore. And I had the experience prior to that. I tried, and I was brought back across the country in handcuffs. So it didn't really work that time, so I was convinced it wasn't going to work again. And thankfully, that person was like, just face this stuff if you really want to be sober. And so it worked like that for me, I think. But
Does anybody want to add anything to that? You don't have to. Just.
I can go on that one too. I think for me, he was right. There wasn't really anything anybody could have done before I got dependent, because that was the path that I was going to choose to take. And you know what? The thing is like today they talk about our past, and it's a door that I leave wide open, because I'm happy that that's where I've been, because it's helped me get to where I am today. And I think for me, a lot of the time, what would have been the most helpful for me as, I started using when I was about 11 years old, and what was the most helpful thing for me was having a counselor there to listen and not to tell me what to do and not to let out my, what I said to them. I actually had a few counselors that, broke confidentiality. And for me, for a long time, I had a hard time, trusting professionals. It was not a good thing. And whenever I got into treatment, I had a really, really hard time opening up because of that reason, because I didn't feel like there was, a real genuine support there. So I think for me, I think it was mainly just having somebody that I could actually trust to talk to, because for a while I wouldn't.
So this one is, I'm one of the many academic advisors who are here. Is there anything that we can do, specific questions to ask during advising appointments to help? The period of time I'm most curious about is before the problem has been recognized.
I mean, before the problem has been recognized, so before you're sober. Is that what that means? I mean, sometimes it becomes kind of clear when someone is struggling, their grades are dropping, if you notice sort of maybe like a change in the pattern, maybe just talking to them and seeing what's going on, seeing if they need extra help, seeing if they need some time. I mean, that would be the only thing I can really think of as sort of addressing, what's going on with you, not just what classes are you going to take. And, if you don't feel qualified to do that, maybe, pointing them towards someone who could. So just kind of taking note of what's going on with the student as they're going through things.
Not pretend it's not happening, but just sort of acknowledging
right,
it.
Exactly. Yeah.
It says, with social media so present in the lives of college students, can you speak to this? Do you participate in these sites? Are there challenges in using them and seeing your posts use and act in certain ways? Or your peers, sorry. So I'll read that one more time. Do you participate on these sites? Are there challenges in using them and seeing your peers use and act in certain ways?
No, I could answer that one too. That's an interesting question. Definitely when I first got sober, that was really hard for me because I really felt like I was missing out. And that's something I sort of forgot to bring up in the challenges that I've experienced since being sober. I wanted this like authentic college experience. Like I wanted to go to college and I wanted to be at frat parties and I wanted to be doing what people thought of as college. And it seemed really disappointing or almost like a punishment to me that I had to be like sober. To me, it almost sounded like a sentence like, okay, so what do I just sit in my room alone every night? Well, everybody has fun. And not only do they get to have fun and just like drink, like drinking was like my favorite thing in the world. I'm like, hey, that's my thing. Like, why do you guys get to do it and not me? So that was definitely kind of hard for a while, like seeing that and not being there. But having a community around you of people who are sober, that you're friends with, that you can connect to, totally changes that and helps that, and kind of like alleviates that blow. The other thing that you might not think of that's like kind of an interesting challenge with that too has been a lot of people. So now I have like a ton of friends in recovery, and a lot of people struggle with having that as public knowledge. So your friends might post something in your wall about going to a meeting or being sober, blah, 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 and people worry about what future employers might think of them if they know that. It really depends what sort of jobs you're trying to get, but especially people who are going into business or law or maybe like medicine, things like that. So that's kind of like a struggle too with being so public. Where do you like draw the line? It's a positive thing, like hanging out with your friends in recovery, putting up pictures of that, but it's almost like, okay, like if I have pictures of this, it almost might look worse than a picture of me and my friends drinking, actually, like, because they might know that I used to be, or that I, am an alcoholic. So that's also a challenge.
Does anybody want to jump into the social media question?
I mean, I think that regarding stigma, and that whole that Katherine had talked about being visible for this community. A long time ago, it used to be you might lose your job over it, you might not get a promotion, you might, all these things could have happened to you professionally. They don't exactly, there's no real reason to buy into that anymore. Certainly don't go around, patting myself on the back and celebrating. This is just something I was supposed to be doing the whole time, and so it's a challenge definitely in being, public. But I had talked about being part of just the newspaper, and if there was a blog, I'm sure, what eventually maybe it'll be a blog someday or whatever, but there are people, this is again a chronic disease, this is like diabetes, and no one takes that, into consideration, or maybe they are, becoming more considerate of that the people are going to go through this, they're going to make mistakes, and they're not going to just, hold their feet to the fire over it, for, just because that they had some, similar to that, like diabetes, I didn't make this choice, I don't think, in a lot of ways, it's just something I was born with, and that, I have to deal with. And so, but again, the other flip side of that is being visible for those other people who want to, to take action, but they don't know where to start, so it's kind of related to social media a little bit. But.
Okay, this is the last question before we break, but what is the ideal response, and what would feel most supportive when you tell someone you are in recovery?
I mean, I think the best thing is when people really like appreciate like how much of a strength that is. And oftentimes people are really supportive of that, and they'll really say, like, wow, like, that's great. It's always the coolest when there's someone who really knows what that means, because it's kind of hard to portray to someone. A lot of people don't really know exactly what it means to be in recovery. So when someone understands, they understand how much work you're putting into your life on a daily basis to be a better person than you were not only when you were using, but the day before. Like, I continually strive, all of us do, each day to work really hard on myself. That doesn't get a lot of recognition. You know what I mean? What gets recognition is doing well in school and blah, blah, blah. But I would say that this work I'm doing, and finding myself, being authentic, finding my purpose in life, that has been by far the most challenging thing to overcome, and also the most rewarding thing to overcome. But people don't really see that. People don't really always acknowledge that. People do within the recovery community, but it's kind of an awkward thing to bring up because people don't always know how to respond. They don't know what it means. So if people were comfortable with it and just kind of like responded casually, I don't really know. I think the first half of that answer was better. I'll just stop there.
Go on.
I think that, a response like, oh, that's great, or, oh, good for you. But I know that I've heard responses like, there's some invasive responses like, what does that mean? What bridge were you living under? And it's like, that's not, if I have a family member and over Christmas, it was like, so you're going to live that way the rest of your life. You were just in a phase, and he started really knocking me down. And what I realized is that he heard this stigma, alcoholism, drug addiction, and it made him feel bad. So he took some of that on himself and then started defending it. And what he was doing is he was countering the last 2.5 years of my recovery of my life. The greatest 2.5 years of my 23 years have been the last. And so it scared him, the idea that his nephew was an alcoholic, and so he stood up for himself and for me in a way that did not make me feel welcome or comfortable with who I am as a person today.
Yeah, also off of what Austin said, I can totally relate to that, and something that I get a lot too is like, aren't you kind of too young to be in recovery? Like, that doesn't really, people will give you that response a lot, like, oh, okay, they'll dismiss it, like, whatever, and or the other thing, people will be like, okay, but what you mean you're like not going to drink forever, or just right now, or you can't just have like one drink? And so just to be like accepting of the fact that that's what it is, and when you get those challenging responses, it's really hard for me because like I still have this active thing. Like Rory said, it's a progressive disease. My brain still wants to get high and drink alcohol. That's why I take these daily steps, do these things continuously, because it's like taking medicine. Like I can't stop doing that. I need to do it throughout the rest of my life. So when someone challenges me and says, well, aren't you a little too young for that? The sick part of my brain is like, am I? You know what I mean? Like, oh, so it becomes this really uncomfortable thing where I get kind of like, maybe like even a little overly defensive because I don't know how to like, it's like I need to protect that because my brain will just go off on a field day, like my thinking otherwise, so.
Okay.
I would like to say just one thing up. So, and Mary Jo had encouraged us to try to unpack some of the language regarding recovery, what it means. And I think one thing I had forgot to mention about, with coping mechanisms that I get involved with other communities around, one of them being related to the Zen Buddhist temple and in town. And, but I think the reason I was drawn there is because one of the steps, the 11th, talks about meditation, and we hear about meditation being used, it's related to things like yoga and other exercise things, like how to calm the mind, and it's not obviously a very challenging thing to do. People spend their entire life, trying to grasp those tool sets, and but to go back to, whether or not, knowing how to just deal with those things. It's just like anything. Like if somebody asked me something like in a job interview, like, oh, so why do you want this job? And then, like I need to think on my feet and take act, So I do rehearse these things in my head, like on a daily basis too, because it's important to do. I never really try to get too far ahead of myself though, because that can be dangerous. But like for instance, like at times I'll be like, hey, do you want to taste this wine? It's like, no. Like not just even a taste, like no, and like 'cause that can lead to some really sticky problems, so yeah, hopefully I captured that.
So first, I would like you to join me in thanking them for participating in the panel this
Thank
morning.
you, guys.
I told them I'm going to stand up here and try not to cry. So a couple things I just want to say in closing that right now there are about 75 colleges and universities in the country that have collegiate recovery programs, and we have almost 4,000 colleges and universities in the country, so we have some work to do. We heard some themes from them about how much connection to peers is important for them, and I think that we have to decide that no longer do young people have to choose between staying sober and getting a college degree. And how we do that and how we advocate for our students for this second chance, I think is really important. We heard how important it is to challenge the notion that alcohol has to be part of everything. If you think about how your student organizations, or how do you have wine and cheese with the dean, and if you do, who might not come because that doesn't feel like a safe place? Think about as student organizations and as you advise student organizations are the only way they're connecting with each other through the bar, through a bar crawl. I think we don't think about how that lands on students who are in recovery, especially if they're not feeling that that's a safe place for them to say who they are and where they are in their journey. The other thing I think was another important theme is financial advocacy. For many of them, they have spent a lot of money getting sober, putting themselves through treatment. And so how we think about how we will help them not only successfully go through treatment, but then successfully come to our colleges and universities and graduate, then I think we'll really be doing the work that we have. The folks from the University of Michigan were really generous with me, but I just want to say, and as Rory said, that I'm standing up here representing a whole bunch of amazing people at U of M who are here. But Matt, if you'll just raise your hand as another resource. Matt is the director of our Collegiate Recovery program. There were a lot of questions here that we didn't get to. The students will be here, be part of the day. Please don't be shy about asking any of us any questions about it. I think we all do feel like we're part of a movement in different places of it, and would really like to help folks who are thinking about doing this work back on your campuses. So thank you very much, and I'm sorry if I went over, Steph. Okay.
Yeah.